Hey everybody, welcome back to another special episode of the Speak Up for the Ocean Blue podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin, and I am partnering with the Blue Nature Alliance to talk more on ocean conservation, one of my favorite subjects ever, to be honest, it's ever. Today is a very different episode than what you've been seeing so far. Normally, I host a panel of people, and we have a great conversation on ocean conservation. We're still having a great conversation on ocean conservation. However, Laure Katz from the Blue Nature Alliance in the U.S. is going to be doing the hosting duties for today. I've relinquished my hosting duties because Laure is so great. She has such insight into regional approaches in ocean conservation, which is going to be the subject of today's conversation. A really important subject matter. We're going to be talking to three wonderful individuals. Arthur Tuda from WIOMSA, which is an organization that represents the Western Indian Ocean. We are going to talk to Angelique Pouponneau, who is from Seychelles out of the Seychelles, and she's going to be talking about the 40% of the exclusive economic zone that they've protected over in the Seychelles. And we're also going to be talking to Joaquin Labougle, who is from the Blue Nature Alliance and located in Uruguay. This is a great conversation that I highly recommend you do not miss. And Laure does a great job at hosting. So Laure, take it away.
Thanks, Andrew, for allowing us to come on your show and to co-host with you today. The Blue Nature Alliance is thrilled to be here and to invite some of our friends to talk about the state of ocean conservation. So I'm going to allow them to each introduce themselves and share where they're coming from. So we'll kick off the panel right from the beginning. And for each of you, please introduce yourself, where you come from, the community that you work in, and what work you do. And why don't we start with Angelique in the Seychelles?
Thank you very much, Laure, and thanks for inviting me as part of the group of friends. I'm Angelique Pouponneau, and I'm from the Seychelles, as already mentioned. I'm the CEO of the Seychelles Conservation and Climate Adaptation Trust. So SEICAT for short. So if you hear me refer to SEICAT, that's the trust fund. We work in the Seychelles with local communities, fishers, marine protected area managers to support their engagement and intervention in sustainable management of our ocean space. Thank you.
Wonderful. So while we're still in the Africa region, why don't we go to Arthur? Would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Laure. My name is Arthur Tuda. I work with the Western Indian Ocean Marine Science Association, better known as WIOMSA. WIOMSA, we work across 10 countries within the Western Indian Ocean region, supporting science, ocean science, marine and coastal management, also working a lot in marine conservation with governments and local communities, and also with a wide range of partners involved in different aspects of marine conservation and ocean management. So at WIOMSA, we actually lead in terms of improving knowledge about marine issues in the region and trying to create solutions that will enable us as a region to preserve our oceans and to sustainably manage the region's resources. So I'm happy to be here today for this nice discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Arthur. And now we'll travel to another continent, to South America, and introduce my teammate, Joaquin. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Well, thank you very much, Laure, and everybody for hosting this podcast. I'm very glad to be participating. My name is Joaquin Labougle. I'm originally from Argentina, but currently based in Uruguay. And as Laure said, I work for the Blue Nature Alliance as the regional program officer for the Americas. So my role is basically to scope or identify large-scale ocean conservation opportunities in the region for the Blue Nature Alliance, but as well work closely with the civil society, governments, local communities, and the private sector in developing engagements to help advance sites along their conservation journey. And of course, then making sure that those engagements are effective and can deliver robust and long-term conservation outcomes. I have a legal background, and before joining the Blue Nature Alliance, I worked during 2016 and 2019 at the Argentine National Parks Administration as the National Director of MPAs, where basically I worked in the establishment of offshore MPAs in Argentine federal waters and in setting key regulatory foundations for the benefit of the Argentine national system of MPA. So very glad to be here today.
We have two of you, Joaquin and Arthur, who both came from a government background and were deeply involved in the creation of marine protected areas in each of your countries. So there may be stuff to share there. So we're coming together today because right now is a global conversation is happening at the World Conservation Congress around what the world needs, what kind of global targets for conservation, including conversations around how we protect our oceans globally. But I think all of us are aware that these global targets then require local action. Right? And so I want to kick off a question to all of you. We'll start with Angelique, but others chime in. Of how do you, working in a place, connect these global goals to local community needs and make sure that there's a bridge there?
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of excitement around global goals, sustainable development goals. You know, these international negotiations around biodiversity and areas beyond national jurisdiction when it comes to ocean. And one of the things that obviously has to translate is having all these global goals down into local action, and these actions have oftentimes have to be taken with communities, and how we bridge that gap is an important one. And I've always felt that there's a need to also always ensure that we have communities, fishers, the coastal communities that we work with part of decision-making processes. And we've seen this really well in the Seychelles when it comes to the marine spatial planning process, where communities have been involved. I say communities, government officials, fishers, all in the same room, involved in decision-making as to what areas should be allocated for marine protection. I think that's something that's been really effective in making sure that everyone sees a role for themselves in achieving a global goal. You're part of the decision-making process. You see where you fit in. But a really interesting project that SEICAT has recently worked on is also we included blue carbon within our nationally determined contributions for the UN climate process. And yes, we had a global goal, a national goal that is contributing to a global climate goal, but we found a way to connect. This high-level international policy document to the local community by recognizing seagrass, which is a coastal wetlands that absorbs carbon, didn't actually have a name in our native language for it. And the way we've connected the community is by engaging in a process for the community to decide what name we should give to it. And by recognizing that there is value to it, we must have a name for it, and one that can be easily identified in our local language, and therefore really bridging the gap between local action and global targets.
Beautiful. What name did they come up with, Angelique?
We've got different life forms. It's yet to be agreed, but a few names that's come up is things like for the oval-shaped seagrass, we've got things like roughly translated to mean seagrass with rabbit ears. So they're in the shape of rabbit ears. So they would go with names that that could help easily identify these shapes and life forms. And also things like turtle grass. So associating seagrass with a charismatic animal that lives within those habitats. So those are the names we're seeing through. But by October, we will have full recognition by the Creole Institute in the Seychelles and have it added to the Creole Dictionary.
Speak to the power of names and naming something in the way that you value it. Joaquin, do you have any examples from where you've worked of kind of that connection of driving local action and connection to global goals?
Yeah, thank you, Laure. I mean, I just wanted to highlight a bit the fact that what makes us, or what I have seen most recently, an increasing trend in terms of this connection is that people are better understanding that the ocean is a natural environment that does not recognize international frontiers or borderlines, in the sense that marine resources migrate long distances, and even the marine ecosystems are complex and highly interconnected systems that make us understand more and more that the only way to have a healthy ocean is just by acting in a very coordinated manner and participatory manner, as Angelique was mentioning. So we regularly see how actions that occur in one place can impact in very distant locations, and probably marine litter is the best example. And even just to give a real life example, here in Uruguay, I usually go for a walk to the beach during weekends, and has been common that I see plastics, and when I kind of analyze those plastics, they are from packages written in foreign language such as Chinese or Mandarin. So there is how we can see that how when we are acting locally, the things that we do or we do not do can can have obviously an impact in other places that are far beyond. So that's why this means that like jurisdictions what happens in a country jurisdiction can easily impact on a different one, and this evidences the importance of acting collectively and in a responsible way. And what I'm seeing is that people is being more and more aware about this and seeing this interconnection on acting locally, but what we do locally have a global impact.
I think we're going to get to kind of regional collaboration in the next line of questionings, but let's turn to Arthur, see if you have another example that you'd want to share of that kind of local action.
Yeah, just from the word local, within the region, we have more locally managed marine areas than what we know as marine protected areas. So this is a clear, indication that local level is driving action for conservation in the region. And right now, the number of community managed areas exceeds those of formally designated marine protected areas. I mean, that's a clear indication that there is obviously a strong drive by people themselves who use these resources. And it's an indication of the understanding and the urgency to begin to play an active role in conservation. I mean, when you talk about global targets and they sound so big sometimes, but they need to be broken down into very basic understanding, and that's what we're trying to do as a region. We break those targets into what makes sense to communities. This is about your life. Okay, it's not just about setting aside and protecting a space, but what does this mean for your future and the future of your children? Can you protect enough for the next 10 generations? So we use local understanding to drive global action, and I think that's the most important thing that we need to now think about as we move towards the bigger conservation targets. How do we, bring on board everybody and leave no one behind in this drive towards building greater space for marine conservation?
As a mom, I actively think about the next generation quite a bit, but I love how you just framed that around 10 generations ahead and really holding that future. That was wonderful. So actually, I think we'll stick with you, Arthur, for the next question. One of the things that all of you spoke to a little bit is kind of the connection regionally and transboundary nature. Joaquin spoke to that. So I'm curious what 30%, if we reach that goal of protecting 30% of our ocean, what does that look like in Africa? And how are countries, governments, NGOs, the supportive community helping and coming together to collaborate at a regional level to move that forward in Africa?
Yeah, so maybe to use the example of the eastern side of Africa, the Western Indian Ocean region. So we recently took stock of what is there in our efforts to protect our ocean through conserved areas. And of course, looking at previous targets where we said as a region we were to hit 10% of coastal and marine areas put under some form of conservation by 2020. So we missed that target by far. And that's a wake-up call for us. And we said, all right, now we are talking of 30% by 2030. Is that going to work for us? But there's hope, because you notice that within the Western Indian Ocean region, within the last 7 years, actually 67% of the new areas have been created in the last few years. So that means that the momentum is actually there. So we just need to build up speed using that momentum to get to 2030 before 2030 gets us. So I think for Africa, there's a clear need, and we're charting a new direction actually, to see how we can lead the rest of the world in this 30% target. Of course, Seychelles has already set the bar very high for the rest of us, and they're acting as our flag up there. So we have to sort of align ourselves with Seychelles and get there. So I think that's already a good indication that Africa is actually taking lead in conservation. And all the countries in Africa, most of them, I must say, have committed to increase protected areas, marine protected areas and community conserved areas. And we're seeing a lot of that happening already. And so that gives us a little bit of hope. And we're seeing a lot of partners coming on board to support this kind of work. And of course, thanks to people like Blue Nature Alliance also for coming in strongly at this point, because it's that kind of support that is now required to actually build a stronger momentum to move forward. So we as WIOMSA and partners across Africa, we are coming together, no longer working as individual organizations, but trying to see how we can all pool our small little resources together to be able to support countries to progress towards this very fast. And it comes at an important time, because COVID has really shown us that we need nature to survive. And I think this is the time to build on that understanding and know that we cannot actually dissociate ourselves from nature. So let us do something for nature in return, for us to be able to even thrive into the future, because we can only survive when the ocean is alive. So I think in Africa, that commitment is clearly there. There's problems here and there, of course, but I think the awareness and the importance of nature conservation, particularly marine conservation, is huge. And of course, this idea of blue economy that is gaining momentum within the region. And our message as conservationists is that there's no blue economy without a thriving natural system. So let us build the natural system, make it strong, and obviously the blue economy will just fly. Yeah, so that's the hope for Africa.
Before we go back to South America, Arthur spoke a little bit about Seychelles. So Angelique, just a follow-up for you. The Seychelles has recently established 30% of your EEZ in a marine protected area network, over 400,000 square kilometers, the largest in the Western Indian Ocean. In Africa, clearly Arthur already called out kind of the leadership that Seychelles is demonstrating in the region. What lessons does Seychelles have for its neighbors and the rest of the world? And what comes next?
Thank you very much for that question. And Arthur, thanks for the shout out. So indeed, in March 2020, Seychelles designated 30% of its exclusive economic zone as marine protected areas. And there are lessons learned from the process to get there, and certainly the thinking for the future. In terms of process, I've already mentioned, making sure you're having an inclusive, consultative marine spatial planning process where everybody understands and sees their role, because that's especially important for a small island developing states, for other countries, other African nations, where enforcement is costly, right? Enforcement costs a lot of money. And if people are already part of the process, where they were part of the process to agree that this area should be protected, it definitely reduces the risk of them then going to these areas and engaging in destructive or exploitative practices, because they were there, they participated, they agreed, and they knew if they made compromises, they knew why they didn't get this, but what they got elsewhere. So that marine spatial planning or participatory and consultative process is extremely important, not just for process, but for the ultimate goal, which is ensuring we do not have a paper park and there's actually enforcement and effective management of these areas. The other thing I would say is political will. I don't think you're going to get very far without having high-level political will from governments to support marine protected areas. I mean, I know the spotlight is on Seychelles here, and sort of to toot our horn a little more, but we were in the middle of COVID-19 and still we went ahead with protecting the 30%. At no point did we say, oh, this may mean something for our economy. In fact, we had already recognized that we needed to do this to strengthen our economy because we're so dependent on tourism and fisheries as our main income earners. Finally, in terms of, I'd say lessons learned is it's a common saying, sort of think of the end at the beginning. And here really thinking about how we're going to have good governance and coordination of a marine protected area network. The Seychelles exclusive economic zone is 1.35 million kilometers square, islands scattered across the coastline, just off the coastline of East Africa. So, you know, a lot of space in between. So coordination and coordinate a concerted coordination effort is going to be really important. And then financing. I really liked the recent quote from Jen Morris, where she said, "A conservation without financing is just a conversation." And I think we really need to think about financing. Seychelles has, of course, engaged in the debt swap, in the sovereign blue bond as innovative sources of financing, but we are now working with other partners to support the next step, the way forward, such as Blue Nature Alliance, to support the enablement of this marine spatial plan and the 30% marine protected areas, in particular looking at those two exact things, governance and financial sustainability. So I'm really excited for the next step, but basically the vision for Seychelles, not only to continue our leadership on the continent as well as internationally, is to be able to tell our story in 2030. You know, to be able to be the example that other countries are not fearful to make the commitments. It can be done.
We're excited to be part of that story, and I think you've already inspired so many different leaders and nations around with the piece of the story you've already written. And so we'll see what the next 10 years brings, and that the implementation side that we know is so important and so hard. All right, let's travel across the ocean again and back to South America. Joaquin, what does 30% look like in the Americas? And what type of collaboration across borders, or what type of partnerships are you seeing emerge in South America?
Thank you, Laure. What I would say that, like for the Latin American and even the Caribbean region, the scale of implementation to advance an ambition of the 30% target like varies significantly across countries. So currently there is a lot of disparity between the progress made, while some countries have been able to demonstrate bold actions in the last years and have therefore advanced significantly towards the accomplishment of such goals. There are others that are still far behind. And just an example of this is, like, for example, we have countries in the region such as Chile and Panama that have already achieved the 30% with good levels of protection and are actively now working to ensure that such areas are effectively managed and protected. There are other countries that are far behind with even less than the 1% of protection, such as is the case of Uruguay. So, but however, what I would agree there as well with what Arthur was mentioning is that there are numerous ongoing efforts across the region and the countries with the aim of increasing the level of protection. As you may know, Costa Rica and Ecuador are currently working to achieve the 30% target in the short term, and even Uruguay is working to get to the 10% by the beginning of next year. For the Caribbean, I would mention as well that is quite similar in the sense that there are some countries that have taken important measures in the last years by putting critical legislation in place and demarcating important ocean ecosystems. And even there has been some political advocacy and momentum in the region. Even in 2013, the Caribbean Challenge Initiative was launched, where countries committed to reach the 20% by 2020, when there was at that stage not even any international agreement that was mandating that. So that was quite big. But again, there has been a kind of quite a lag between the ambition and the achievement or the implementation of those targets. But something that I would say that is important to remark is that sometimes we have seen governments would have intended to make efforts in increasing the ocean protection by designating areas with sometimes not the likelihood of success to attend the ocean real and imminent threat. So it has been vastly evidenced, as you know, that MPAs under 30% can deliver important social, economic, and environmental benefits. But for that, we really need to care as well about quality. And I'm mentioning this because there have been some designations related more to vertical zoning or other measures which sometimes have not been recommended by IUCN. And I think it's important that countries should be looking as well as quality as they reach the 30%. Maybe in relation to your question about regional collaboration and coordination, I mean, there are very good examples in the region. So we have, for example, Argentina and Chile that are currently working jointly in a proposal for an MPA in Domain 1 in Camelar. And this is a coordination that has been conducted for now more than 6 years across different levels, like science, communications, and politics. These two countries also work together in a coordinated manner back in 2018 and created two adjacent MPAs in the subantarctic region as well. And even in the Asian tropical Pacific, we have there a regional cooperation mechanism and framework that aims to ensure that those countries, so Ecuador, Costa Rica, Colombia, and Panama, work on a coordinated and integrated manner in responding to the existing threats and implementing key MPAs that have that those countries have within its national jurisdiction, but that they have a really important connectivity, and they are working how to standardize the management across the different countries to ensure that they deliver effective and harmonious outcomes for the region. So, I mean, there are many other more examples that I could still be mentioning, but I think those are some importance that demonstrate that there has been in the past some regional cooperation in terms of marine conservation, and there are lessons to be learned there as well, and of course, room for improvement.
You made the point earlier, Joaquin, about kind of the need for transboundary coordination and then the fact that animals don't see those jurisdictional boundaries. It's true everywhere in the ocean, but I would particularly say in your region, there's some of my favorite species, including hammerheads and other shark species that travel from protected area to protected area, and these kind of refugees throughout that region. The connectivity between the countries is so critical. So I'm happy to hear about that kind of regional effort and coordination. Arthur.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something on what you've said and what has been said about regional connectivity. I think this is an important part of the puzzle that, countries cannot work alone on this issue. And it's important that we think of the ocean as one big system that we all share. So in Africa, I think there's a big drive now towards transboundary collaboration in conservation. Kenya and Tanzania, for example, are moving with speed to establish a transboundary conservation area, which is we hope to achieve in the next 1 or 2 years. So that's giving us a lot of hope. But more importantly, we are connecting people who work in conservation. I think that's one thing that we need to think about. And as a region, we've gone ahead to try and create a strong network of practitioners because, you know, those who work in conservation are very few in the region or in Africa for that matter. And there's very little investment in people. You know, we talk about 30%, which is very big targets. Most countries are already struggling with the resources and fewer numbers of practitioners to manage these areas. So as we go to 30, this is going to be even a bigger challenge for us. And the more reason we need to be connected as experts and practitioners and people work in conservation, that we sort of share ideas, resources, and learning within our small spheres as regions. So I think that's something that we need to move along hand in hand with the expansion. Let's also build the capacity to manage these areas because that will guarantee the quality that we're talking about. It's good to have 30%. It's another thing to have them well managed and functioning. So I think we need to let us not leave the quality part behind and the people. Let it move together with the expansion. Yeah, that's what I wanted to add.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Arthur. So I think we have time for one more question, and this is one around what gives us hope. You know, we're all deeply connected to and committed to ocean conservation, and so as you reflect on what you see today in this field, what makes you hopeful for the next 10 years? Joaquin, do you want to start with this one?
Yes, Laure, of course. I mean, I'm just like usually a context person, and I think that is, if you look at what happened in the last 2 decades in ocean conservation and even especially in large-scale ocean conservation, it definitely makes you feel confident since there has been a kind of a growing and increasing awareness and momentum around this field, and that I think that has not definitely yet reached its highest point. So, and just as a matter of fact, for example, in the early 2000s, the area covered by MPA was approximately 2 million square kilometers. So that was less than 1% of the ocean. And since then, in the last 2 decades, there has been a really important increase in MPA coverage. And we are actually over the 28 million square kilometers. That is mostly around 8% of the ocean. And even we haven't yet discovered what's there in the high seas, and I think that there is where the tension will be moving, and there is yet a new world to discover in the sense that only 1.2% of the high seas is protected, and we know that we have the BB&J under negotiation that would hopefully enable a new legal framework to establish MPAs in the high seas with a lot of room of even for us in this generation to get to achieve the first generation of high seas MPAs, which will keep on adding to important square kilometers to the global ocean to be protected. So what makes me hope, in short, is this increasing trend and still what we have to discover in the next year. So I would say that.
The new frontier will be the high seas for sure. Arthur, would you like to share next? What makes you hopeful?
Yeah, I think I'm very hopeful, I must say. And WAMSA just recently did a magazine for the region on MPs. I don't know whether you've got a copy, but the theme is about hope for conservation. So it's like it just came at the right time, and it tells the stories of people who work in marine conservation in the region and the great things they're doing. You know, from coral reef restoration to working with communities to preserving endangered species. I mean, these are stories from people who do the actual work. And that alone tells you that there is increased awareness and increased engagement. Last many years or decades, ocean conservation was the preserve of a few people and experts. But now we are seeing everybody getting in and getting involved. and taking a deeper interest in ocean matters. That for me already is a good sign for the future. The awareness levels have gone up. Everybody understands that there's wealth in the ocean, and therefore the ocean needs to be preserved. In Africa, for example, the ocean was not a story to be talked about. We were so used to rivers and lakes inland, but now everybody's talking about the ocean. Everybody's talking about the blue economy. Everybody's talking about the wealth for our country. And so for me, that increased awareness already is good for us, because the younger generation is very much aware of the importance of the ocean. And I think this is something we need to really put a lot of investment in, because it's the only hope. By the time we get to 2030, kids who are born today will be 10 years old, and they'll be having work to do in the ocean. So I think we need to be hopeful that we are creating something that is great, not just for our generation, but for the generations to come. But finally, in terms of the hope that I see, especially for Africa, is that already, before people looked at the ocean as a place where you could extract resources inexhaustibly. But now that reality is changing, because we understand that the ocean is actually dying. If you talk to fishermen, if you talk to communities along the coast, they'll tell you, this is not the ocean that we were born to know. We didn't know this kind of ocean. So for me, that is a change of thinking and attitude, and that is something that we need to build on as practitioners. And finally, there's a growing community of practitioners and people who are leading this conversation, and we need to strengthen that, because that is the only way we can achieve the bigger goals that we are setting for ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you for being part of that conversation and that community. Angelique, what gives you hope?
Just to say, I completely, echo what's been said. I'm also extremely hopeful because of all the factors that's been mentioned. But today, I have been spending my day with a group of young people who are getting excited about the climate change conference. So I have had the most amazing day, including young people calling me out on certain things that they don't agree with, and that's what gives me hope. It is the fact that the younger generation are aware, they're active, they're calling decision makers out on when they disagree on something, they're holding them to account, and that gives me hope, because they're already so much more educated and more conscious than, we were back in when we were that age. And I'm hopeful because they're already leaders. They're already leading initiatives in their own communities, in their own schools. And I'm so excited to see what they will be doing once they're given roles within governments, within NGOs, and really pushing the envelope and pushing the agenda to make sure that we have a secure, fair, and equitable future.
I hope all of us get to spend more time with activists and young people with that spirit. That sounds like a fantastic day. I'll just offer that you all give me hope in the work that you're doing. I have the privilege of working with each of you, and the stories that you share from your work gives me hope that we can reach ambitious, audacious goals that we need for the survival of our planet and to be able to thrive with our ocean. So I just want to thank you all for the work that you do and for joining this conversation, for sharing what you do with us and out hopefully to listeners. And to Andrew for inviting us to take over his podcast and have a conversation. So thank you all. Have a great day. And back over to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Laure, for hosting, and I appreciate Arthur, Angelique, and Joaquin for joining us on today's episode. What a great conversation. What a wonderful conversation on different styles of regional approaches from different parts of the world and what each of them can learn from each other, their successes, their challenges. Such a great way of sharing information and successes through this conversation. If you have similar experiences or you want to know more about it, you can go to bluenaturealliance.org, or you can drop a comment down below to say, hey, I'm really interested in this kind of stuff. Where can I find out more? Or you can share your own experience if you've been involved in any kind of marine conservation process. Doesn't matter the scale, doesn't matter where in the world, we'd love to hear from you. You can also listen to this podcast in audio format at speakupforblue.com. Again, all the links are going to be in the description below. I want to thank you so much for joining us on today's episode. It's been a real treat to be able to host this. Hopefully you'll get more down in the future. But until next time, thank you so much for joining this special episode of the Speak Up for the Ocean Blue podcast with a partnership from Blue Nature Alliance. And I'm your host, Angelique, and have a great day and happy conservation.